something that there really aren't any books, there actually aren't any books on this subject. That's the absolute unification of physics and metaphysics, because necessitatively, there's that interesting word, necessitatively. The ancient Greeks had a word for it called ananke. Really what it translates into is it can't exist any other way. You know, you're talking about the head side of a coin and the tail side of the coin. They're not two different things. They're both comprised out of course, the silver of the coinage. Not that this coin is made out of silver. I had a live stream last night. It lasted for essentially 3 hours, and I had a couple questions asked people that see if they could figure out what was being discussed, talking about the holographic nature of the universe. And fundamentally, these are not trick questions. They're really, really simple. And I said, you know, you could figure out a whole lot about the nature of the universe. There's two fundamental questions. One was, I asked them, I said, what would be the term, the word that you would give to a signal without modulation? Because a signal, reference to frequency, of course, whether it be radio frequency, light, gamma, X-ray, which are all coaxial circuit of light. There's visible light and invisible light, and they're all the exact same thing, except for their frequency and modulation. And the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. The higher the energy circuit, the smaller the spatial footprint, which really kind of tells you everything. And I said, what's that one word that you would give to a signal without modulation, which wouldn't be a signal at all, because a signal implies modulation with a set frequency and wavelength. And I said, here's something else you could figure out, and it would really tell you everything about the nature of the universe, and I'm getting to the holographic universe here in a second. I said, you know, at the center of gravity, you know, if you could take a ship to the center of the Earth, little sort of spherical thing, which of course is not really possible, but if you could, in the center of everything we imply that there is the greatest concentration of that thing, except for the things that people are always talking about in field theory, such as gravity and magnetism. It is the case, it's not my opinion, you can stick a Gauss meter between two magnets and bring them together. Certain Gauss meter probes are incredibly thin, thinner than a sheet of paper, to measure magnetic flux. Anyway, at the center of a magnet, when you bring two magnets together to make one magnet, or some magnets actually have a hole in them where the center of the magnet is this empty spot, there is no magnetic flux. Center of gravity, there is not that phenomenon. People say, gravity doesn't exist. Even you said it before. Well, this is just a word, of course, that human beings use. Let's just talk about the phenomena that occurs when you jump off a stepladder, for example. So gravity doesn't exist. Like, oh, what's that particular phenomena? And they want to engage in a battle of words, which of course is sophistry and logomachy. So, well, the center of a magnet, there is no magnetic flux. At the center of an acceleration of gravity, like you falling towards the Earth, so on and so forth. At the center of that, there is no gravity. At the center of this apple, of course, we've been eating a bunch of apples lately. People tell me how bad apples are. You have all the things that are bad. I mean, apple's really bad for you. Oh, it's loaded with sugar. That's a matter for another discussion. The center of an apple, interestingly enough, even though it's really small, but at the center of an apple, there is no apple to consume. And there is, however, these interesting little black things called seeds. Pure potential, but there is no apple to eat at the center, so you make your way to the center of the apple. That would be where the best part of the apple would be, or like the juiciest part, but there's no apple there to eat. There are, however, these little things called seeds. We can make a reference to counter space, we can make a reference, and getting back to the radio analogy, where the radio, of course, would be the body. Water is, of course, the antenna. And the signal, not the signal, excuse me, the broadcast is the consubstantiality of matter and spirit. Analogously, it would be consciousness, because the broadcast goes no further than the radio, and it's the consubstantiality of two things, that being the signal and the radio, the DNA, which itself has a frequency. I don't know if you've ever seen the DNA helix. It has its own frequency. By the way, did you know that the radius to the rise on DNA is a proportionality of 1 to phi? Isn't that interesting? Think about this too for a second, just as a little side tangent here. The water molecule itself, which is the antenna for life to occur, is the perfect Pythagorean incommensurable geometry of 1, 1 with a base of phi. I've recently done 2 videos on that. But DNA itself, just like the DNA inside this little seed here, inside this little seed, of course, you know, well, from an acorn, of course this is not an acorn like from an oak tree, is the map for building another apple tree. Within it, adding water and sticking some soil around it, you have, given enough years and time and nurturing and sunlight, you have, of course, another apple tree. That is analogous in the radio analogy of the analog to digital converter, that which interpolates the signal and then produces, because when you add water to this and you stick it in the dirt, the little analog to digital converter takes the signal from the water that's fed to the seed and says, well, this particular DNA AD converter, I don't know if you know what an analog to digital converter, but that's the thing for taking the analog signal in a radio. And of course we could talk about an antique radio which uses tubes, which doesn't have an analog to digital converter. There's still a processing circuit on an old-timey tube radio, but on all modern radios, of course, we have an analog to digital converter which interpolates that water and says, you know, what are we building here? This isn't a tomato seed, and this isn't an acorn seed. It's an apple tree seed. So that would be the AD converter. Everything from physics to metaphysics, on the important stuff that we observe and do every day, radios, lasers, so on and so forth, is so perfectly simple and mirrors everything in metaphysics. And I'm quickly getting here to the holographic universe. But getting back to those questions that I asked people to think about, you know, what is the term one would give to a signal with no modulation, since a signal by definition is modulation? And the answer would be, of course, pure energy. But pure energy is not implied unless you imply it, that it is an energy circuit which naturally releases or dissipates its own energy, as in the case of the dielectric. The case of the dielectric, which manifests magnetism, which has its own frequency, and that frequency is called the L'Amour frequency, by the way, is energy. So a signal without modulation wouldn't be a signal at all. It would be pure energy. A couple people actually said the ether by definition is non-Cartesian pure potential, i.e. energy itself. So it's another fancy way of saying the same thing. We say pure energy, we say counter space, say 0 point energy, you could say the ether. There's like a dozen different words we could use which would be denotatively accurate. Everything, too, by the way, that we understand about energy, the loss of energy, is mirrored from physics and metaphysics. The light circuit itself, of course, has a transverse component due to modulation. Atomic volume is due to magnetism. The one thing these scientists have all gotten correct, they say every atom is 99.99999% empty space. There's nothing. Well, that's almost true. In other words, an atom is mostly nothing substantial. At the nucleus, of course, the volume measured in picometers is nothing other than a magnetodielectric dynamo, which is no different than saying every type of frequency modulation, including magnetism, is a voluminous loss of energy which manifests the creation of space. Frequency and wavelength of any signal is implied the volume, which is relational to capacitance, because the higher the energy capacitance, the greater the frequency and the smaller the space. Now getting on to metaphysics. And people need to think about that too, just as one last refrain, since now we know the secret of a signal that has no modulation is energy. I told people, I said, think about the fact that at the center of a magnet there is no magnetic flux. At the center of gravity there is no gravity. And it's no different in the physical world than this apple. At the center of this apple there is no apple to eat. There's a hollow little cavity. By the way, that little cavity, if you trace it out, is a pentagram, by the way. You can actually sit there. Not that I can draw on an apple too easy, but you can draw out a little pentagram. And right in there, of course, are the little pure energy potential packets that can sit for decades, hundreds of years. We actually found seeds from thousands of years ago, and we're able to sprout them. Depending on the conditions they're actually kept in, kept cool and dry, you sprout seeds from thousands of years ago. Not a lot of seeds are like that, but a whole lot of them are. Even a mirage is a real, even a mirage, of course, is a real, boy, it's really humid. We had a lightning storm earlier today. The humidity is like about 1,000%, so it's quite miserable here. If you notice a slight difference in my mood, it's like humidity is so thick you could cut it with a knife. So even a mirage is a real mirage. In the case of a monomyakaya, is a reference, ancient Pali compound term, reference to a disembodied being, or what's conventionally called a ghost. This is a mentation, mono, maya, artifice, kaya, body, mentation, made artifice. This, of course, is a modulation due to primordial agnosis, which has not been stripped and is not connected with the body itself. People say, what happens to us after we die? I say, well, what makes you think you are that which dies? You are not that which dies. This, of course, is another shell, another body. There are different types of bodies. You have a different body when you're walking around and doing all sorts of elaborate things in your dreams. This word given to ethereal vision, not of physical eyes, because you're not using your physical eyes and you're looking around and seeing things and doing things in your dream state. That dream state, fundamentally, other than being still consubstantial with the physical body, is no different than the transcendent body after one, of course, has left this body. You still see things and colors and people. You see all sorts of stuff. I mean, people ask these fundamental questions. Most people dream every night. I dream very rarely. Dreams, by the way, are, of course, the unconscious fears and desires, necessitatively and logically so. The greater one progresses in wisdom, the fewer the dreams one will have. I mean, that's just actually hyperlogical. Nothing that is an appearance, of course, can be real. Anything that has a beginning in time has an end in time. And what do we mean by real? We don't mean substantially real, but genuinely real, because we can't take refuge in anything that has a beginning in time, or which, of course, is existential. The cosmos of phenomena, of course, has always been implied. Phenomena of something, meaning phenomena of something else. Phenomena implies noumena. I mean, a mirage of what? A mirage of something real. Nature's mirage, nature's hologram, of course, is magnetism. The loss of that energy or inertia manifests as the magnetic field. Magnetism is the dialectic field. I said dialectic, excuse me. I've been writing an article recently on dialectics. The dielectric field, excuse me. This is what happens when you think about 10 things at once. I'll edit that out of the video. Dielectric field. Anything, of course, that appears implies an antecedent subject prior to that which appears. You know, prior to this apple, eventually we could go back in time. We could see this apple being part of the tree and the tree being part of the seed, and it just goes back and back and back and back. It's amazing something. What is that old saying, poem? It goes something like from small acorns, big trees grow, I think it goes. People are always looking at phenomena, but they're never looking at noumena. It's like, why is there no magnetic flux at the center of a magnet? Why is there no apple at the center of an apple? Why is there no gravity at the center of gravity? Center of the vector of acceleration of gravity of two bodies, to keep it simple. Anything that, of course, appears implies that antecedent subject prior to that which appears, as I just said. For what appears partakes of time and, of course, is logically phenomena, or a hologram. Holograph, excuse me. Whatever can be known objectively, of course, cannot be the self with a capital S. All forms of monistic logical metaphysics, both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian, said the same thing. There are two selves. There's the self you see in the mirror when you're brushing your teeth, and there's a transcendent self, which of course is not to be seen. This is the self everybody thinks they are, whereas this is the self that which they truly are, right here. Don't take that analogy too far, however. volume and modulation. Wherever there's volume and modulation, just like the Moore frequency, just like magnetism, because space comes from the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, the conjugate geometry of the entire universe. There's energy and there's a loss of energy. Human beings, of course, have everything upside down and backwards. One of the fundamental primordial aspects of primordial agnosis is that human beings see everything upside down. They see energy as a loss of energy when it actually is true energy. You say energy, people think of like a mushroom cloud from an atomic blast or something, when the true energy would, of course, be that softball-sized lump of plutonium or fissionable uranium. People don't see that as energy. It's like, well, that's not impressive. Well, that's denotatively energy, pure potential, but people don't see that. They see energy as the impotency of energy, which has already been released. Volume and modulation. Atomic volume, of course, is due to magnetism. Is the holographic universe of phenomena that us ignorant human beings, of course, see as real, but which, of course, is wholly unreal. Signal volume modulation relative to all electromagnetic frequencies, both light, radio, gamma, X-ray, and so on, including super high energy light, which of course is matter. Isn't it neat how that works? All the way from low energy of radio to infrared to visible light to X-ray to gamma, and way above that of gamma we have fundamental matter. Isn't it neat how nature keeps everything really simple? Smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. The holographic universe of magnetism is due to the loss of energy or inertia. The greater the power present, the smaller the spatial capacitance energy circuit that is released. We have neutron stars and pulsars, which are emitting out X-rays. There's radio pulsars, there's X-ray pulsars, there's gamma neutron stars. What about something way more powerful than that? Wouldn't it be emitting something much, much more powerful than radio and X-ray and gamma? Yes! Human beings on the planet Earth call those things black holes. They're also emitting a magnitude higher than X-ray and gamma, which is hydrogen. Trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. You can look that up. You can do a Google search, type in galactic jet or astrophysical jet. So, isn't it neat how nature keeps things so simple, yet human beings are so incredibly ignorant that they can't see the simplicity of the conjugate geometry of the entire universe? Energy, the impotency of energy, i.e. the release of energy. Capacitance, resistance, permeability, and permittivity, which is no different than saying the geometry of the hyperboloid of capacitance and energy, and the geometry of the release of energy, which is the generation of space, the geometry of magnetism. Magnetism, of course, is that loss of energy of the dielectric. However, magnetism is just the dielectric field. It's no different than saying ice is the phenomena of cold water. We have different names and different concepts for all sorts of things, which are nothing other than attributional state differences. That which human beings call hydrogen, and all atoms are compounds of hydrogen, that which human beings call X-rays and gamma rays and radio and visible light, are all electromagnetic radiation. The only differentiation is, of course, is capacitance, energy potential, and a spatial footprint thereof. And of course, one is radio, the other one is visible light, the other one is X-ray and gamma, which is dangerous. But above that is something stable, much higher capacitance and energy potential. I made that prediction many years ago, that we would discover that super high energy light is fundamental matter, and that discovery was made last year using 2 in-phase lasers generated matter. My prediction was 100% correct, because I knew Mother Nature had to be an incredibly simple hippie chick, which she is. Not that Mother Nature is really a chick or a person, of course. Tying all this into the holographic universe and liberation, the commandment that's put forward by Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, and I do mean original. The Upanishads, the principal Upanishads, is all the same thing. They all say the same thing. The subjugation of becoming, like Bhavanirodha Nabandham. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Remember, modulation is signal, is volume, is manifestation, is holographic, is of course samsara. Just like this apple. We're all fascinated by the apple, but who's fascinated by the little hollow spot in the center with the seeds where you take the seeds and plant them and get more apple trees? Nobody's fascinated by that. We want to know how the apple tastes. We all want to know about the phenomena. Everybody's interested in the phenomena, but nobody's interested in the noumena. The apple itself would be physics. That little hollow spot in the seed in the middle would be metaphysics, even though a seed is technically physical, of course. The subjugation of becoming means nirvana, i.e. liberation. Liberation, of course, is achieved by wisdom, which, of course, is self-proximity, transcendent self-proximity. Wouldn't that be the erasure of modulation? Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. This is the ultimate statement of someone who is wise and has been engaging in yoga. Yoga literally means to yoke to. It's almost the same in English. Yoga. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The fruit or end goal of yoga, i.e. liberation, genuine insight, is chitta vritti nirodha. The subjugation of nirodha. The chitta, which is nous or spiritus sanctum, vritti. Vritti means perturbation. That would be no different than saying signal or modulation. The same thing as I was talking about originally at the beginning of this video, which is the signal without modulation. Signal without modulation would have no frequency, it would have no footprint. It couldn't be tuned, it couldn't be seen, it couldn't be captured, it couldn't experience anything in this world. Talking about yoga chitta vritti nirodha and bhava nirodha nibbandham, the subjugation of becoming implies nibbana. Suvimutta chittasa nibbandham is no different than saying bhava nirodha nibbandham. The thoroughly liberated chitta, nous spiritus sanctum, means nirvana. Suvimutta, the thoroughly liberated chitta, nous spirit, means nirvana. How would you liberate something? Well, you liberate it by removing its modulation. Well, why is it modulated? Primordial agnosis. The loss of that energy or inertia is causing modulation. When modulation is present, then it is tunable. When it is tunable, then we, of course, have this existential holographic being, i.e. the existential self. And the primordial agnosis manifests as conventional ignorance, that we suffer the slings and arrows of existential existence, life, old age, death, suffering, so on and so forth. Metaphysics and physics are not two different things. They are one thing and one thing only. By studying the one and overlapping the other, we can see the other, and vice versa. Look at metaphysics, we can understand physics. We look at physics, we can understand metaphysics. But today's so-called scientists, they don't do that, and people don't think like that. You have to have a multidisciplinary approach of looking at all physics through the lens of metaphysics and vice versa, because they can't be two different things. There's not the physics of so-and-so, the University of Physics over here, and we have the School of Metaphysics over here. Today's so-called scientists, which are not scientists at all, they're mathematicians, they've done that. Well, that's philosophy over here. We're only interested in physical science. So they're not two different things. Anyway, all of this bespeaks of, yes, I did say bespeak, bespeaks of the holographic universe and metaphysics, what one implies of the other and vice versa. By the way, if you're actually able to take the seed apart, which I've done here with my fingernails, inside the little apple seed, and split its two halves, just like you could do with the bean seed, inside the seed are two more halves, and inside those halves is nothing. So if we want to take it down even further, but of course we do have the genetics and the DNA of this little seed, which could have sprouted out another apple tree. Physics and metaphysics. Modulation and the absence of modulation. All liberation is the absence of modulation, the removal of which is achieved through and by wisdom. The holographic universe of phenomena is unreal. Is the most repeated phrase in ancient Pali, nami soata, not the soul. You can't say my soul, even though it sounds logical and simple. My soul implies one thing has another, which of course that would be an illogical statement. My soul implies, I have a soul, meaning one thing has another, so I can't say that. I hope you understand that. That's the reason why I wanted to illuminate that little thing. People say, my soul! People say that all the time. My soul! Where's my soul? You keep implying one thing has something else. There's no such thing as my soul. A radio doesn't have a signal in it. There's no signal in the radio. There's no soul in the body. But that's not a denial of a signal, nor is it a denial of the soul either. There's the consubstantiality of both, which of course makes life, and in the case of the radio analogy, makes the broadcast. But a radio is not the signal, nor is there a signal in the radio. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the holographic nature of physics and metaphysics, and how they're not two different things, rather one thing. I hope I made this clear. I tried to keep it short, sweet, and concise. I might have failed at that, but I don't think I did. I try to keep them right in there without, like, talking my legs off endlessly for super long periods of time. Anybody, if you want to contact me, my name and email is in the description below. People always forget that. Any donation in the below description is always warmly welcome, or you just send me an email and tell me how much you didn't like it. I take suggestions on other emails too. Whatever makes you happy. Thanks, and goodbye.